Please, let me see my dog one last time." Those were the words Jonah Reed whispered the night before his execution. Wrongfully convicted, forgotten by the world, and moments from death, his only wish was to see the loyal German shepherd who never gave up on him. But when the truth begins to surface, and the system scrambles to bury its secrets, Jonah's story becomes more than a final goodbye. It becomes a revolution. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day, and drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. No visitors, no appeals, no more hope, but just one request: let me see my dog. Those were the words that hung like smoke in the stale air of Cell A9, whispered from the cracked lips of Jonah Reed, the man society had already buried, though his heart still beat. Gray morning filtered weakly through a high, narrow window in Stonegate Correctional Facility, a place so cold it could leach the soul out of a preacher. The concrete walls, painted a dull, institutional gray, absorbed every ounce of humanity. The only sign of life in Jonah's cell was the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest beneath a threadbare wool blanket, and the trembling in his fingers as he clutched a small, creased photograph to his chest. A photo of a dog, his dog named Scout. A tan and black German shepherd with eyes that used to dance under sunlight. 5 years ago, Scout had slept curled up on Jonah's couch. 5 years ago, Jonah was a free man. 5 years ago, he was engaged to the love of his life and building a security firm that would have been the first black-owned operation of its kind in the Pacific Northwest. And 5 years ago, it all shattered the night they found Jonah standing over a man bleeding out on a rain-soaked pavement. That man was Douglas Mearns, a real estate tycoon with ties so deep into the city's veins, his enemies rarely lived to speak twice. Jonah had sworn he was framed. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong man. But the courts, the prosecutors, even the media, all saw what they wanted: a scapegoat with just enough motive and a perfectly timed bank deposit to seal the noose. He was sentenced to death. And now he had 12 hours left. Jonah's voice cracked as he stared through the bars at the guard outside, a young man named Fielding who wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'm not asking for a miracle, son. Just let me see Scout, just once." Fielding shifted uncomfortably, his gloved hand tightening on the baton at his belt. "Final requests have to go through Warden Caro, you know that." "I know the rules," Jonah said with a bitter smile. "Been living by 'em every second of every day. All I'm asking is to be a man one last time. Not an inmate, not a monster, just a man who loved his dog." Fielding hesitated. A sliver of guilt crossed his face. Then he turned and walked off down the corridor, boots echoing like a slow funeral march. Jonah exhaled and closed his eyes, retreating inward to quieter memories. Sunrises on the old trail, Scout tugging excitedly at the leash, tail wagging so hard he'd nearly knock himself over. He remembered Scout's bark when he saw a squirrel, the way he'd lean against Jonah's leg when they'd sit on the porch. That dog had been more than a pet. He had been Jonah's anchor when the rest of the world turned its back. His fiancée Naomi had taken Scout in after Jonah's arrest. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, not after the media storm tore through both their lives. But he knew in his bones that Scout was still with her, still safe. Jonah had clung to that image for 5 endless years. The door at the far end of the hallway groaned open. Footsteps, sharper now, approached. They stopped outside his cell. It was Warden Eleanor Caro. Steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, pressed uniform spotless, voice flat as a courtroom verdict. "Reed," she said. "Final arrangements are underway. You'll be transferred to the holding suite by 6 a.m. Jonah nodded slowly, sitting up. "And my request?" She paused. "Unusual. Animals are not permitted inside facility walls." "He's not just an animal," Jonah replied. "He's the only soul in this world who never doubted me." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You say the dog is still with Naomi Carson?" "Yes, she kept him." Warden Caro exhaled sharply through her nose. "I'll see what I can do. But don't hang your hope on it." "I don't have any left to hang," Jonah murmured. She turned and left, her footsteps vanishing into the vast, empty belly of the prison. Jonah pressed the photograph to his forehead and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for salvation. Not even for justice. Just for time. Just for Scout. Across the city, in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of Cascade Falls, Naomi Carson stood in her kitchen staring at a coffee cup she hadn't touched in an hour. Scout lay curled on a thick rug nearby, his once sleek coat now dusted with silver, his ears still sharp but movements slower, wiser. When Naomi stepped forward, Scout's tail gave a slow wag, and he lifted his head, sensing her tension. She knelt beside him. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered. Scout licked her hand. A knock shattered the silence. Naomi walked to the door, heart thudding, expecting another reporter. But it wasn't a journalist. It was a courier. He handed her a letter, sealed with the official emblem of Stonegate Correctional Facility. Inside, it was a single sheet. "Miss Carson, per inmate Jonah Reed's final request, he wishes to see his dog, Scout, prior to scheduled execution. Conditional approval has been granted, provided the animal is in your custody and brought to Stonegate no later than 6 a.m., Warden Eleanor Caro." Naomi didn't breathe for a long moment. Then she dropped the letter and sank to her knees beside Scout. "You want to see him, don't you?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "After everything, he never forgot you." Scout pressed his head into her chest. Naomi stood, heart trembling like a wire in a storm. "We're going," she whispered, grabbing her coat. "We're going right now." Back in cell A9, Jonah sat still in the center of his bunk, eyes locked on the last sliver of night sky he could see through the narrow window. The first color of dawn had begun to stain the horizon, a dull orange bleeding into indigo. He imagined Scout running through the field behind their old house, chasing the morning breeze. He wondered if Scout would even remember him. 5 years was a long time. Would the dog look through him? Bark in fear? Or would he know? The rattle of keys down the hall pulled him from the memory. Guard Fielding returned, flanked by 2 others. "Let's go," Fielding said. Jonah rose slowly. "Is the dog coming?" Fielding's jaw clenched. "They're working on it." Jonah held out his wrists. The cuffs clicked shut, colder than he remembered. As they led him out of the cell, he glanced back just once, at the photo of Scout left on the pillow, lit by the growing glow of dawn. To him, it wasn't just the last day. It was the day he might be remembered for something other than a murder he didn't commit. And maybe, just maybe, the last soul he ever loved would be waiting when the door opened. The tires of Naomi's rust-speckled pickup shrieked slightly as they hugged the curves of the highway. The sun hadn't yet burned through the fog hanging low over Cascade Valley, but time refused to slow. The dashboard clock glared back at her, 4:27 a.m. She had exactly 93 minutes to get Scout to Jonah. Scout sat in the passenger seat, ears alert, his head tilted as if he sensed something monumental was unfolding. Naomi stole a glance at him, her throat tightening. "You remember him, don't you?" she whispered, her voice fragile. "I know it's been years, but you never stopped looking at the door like he might walk in any second." Scout responded with a soft whine and placed one paw gently on her knee. Naomi blinked away the blur in her vision. "He's waiting for you, boy, and I'll be damned if we don't get there in time." She pushed the accelerator a little further. Years ago, this road had taken them to summer camping trips and lakeside afternoons, Jonah laughing behind the wheel, one hand out the window, the other holding hers. That was before the world turned, before the sirens outside their apartment, the reporters, the trial that tore their lives in half. Naomi had spent every single day since fighting 2 battles, one with the world and one with herself. Everyone told her to move on, but she couldn't, wouldn't. There were too many inconsistencies in the case, too many questions about the night Douglas Mearns was killed. How had Jonah's fingerprints ended up on a knife that was supposedly his but had disappeared from his truck weeks earlier? Why did Mearns, a man known for his ruthless dealings, have no surveillance footage from the building where he was killed, even though every other camera in his condo complex was working? It never made sense. And now, on the last day of Jonah's life, she was praying it wouldn't be too late to change the ending. As Naomi sped down the fog-lined highway, her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She glanced down. Unknown number. With one hand, she clicked it to speaker. "Hello? Miss Carson, this is Warden Eleanor Caro." Naomi's pulse jumped. Yes, I'm on the way. Scout is with me. We're making good time." "Good," the warden said. Her tone was clipped, but not without compassion. "We've secured conditional clearance for Scout to be brought inside the facility's side entrance. You'll be met by Officer Lantry. There are no delays permitted, understood? If you're not here by 6, the request will be void. I understand, Naomi said, her voice firm. We'll be there. Very well, and thank you for doing this. It means more to him than you know. Naomi ended the call, her jaw tight. Scout let out another small whimper, sensing the rise in her tension. Almost there, she murmured, pushing the truck to 75 miles per hour on the quiet rural stretch. You'll see him soon. The sky was beginning to shift, a soft blush crawling over the dark ridge of pines in the distance. She could feel it in her chest, the mix of dread and hope twisting together like two vines strangling a beating heart. Scout sat upright, ears perked, eyes fixed on the windshield, as if he could see through time and distance. At the same moment, inside Stonegate Correctional's final holding suite, Jonah Reed sat beneath a buzzing fluorescent light. His hands were uncuffed now, though guards stood within arm's reach. A brown paper bag sat unopened on the metal table beside him, a cheeseburger and a warm can of orange soda. He didn't have the stomach to eat it. Instead, he held a blanket in his lap, fingers tracing the stitched initials, SR. From a time when Scout was still just a pup, chewing through half the throw pillows in their living room. Chaplain Morris, a gentle, steady man with warm eyes and a worn Bible, sat across from him. You know, the chaplain said, when I first met you, I didn't expect you to still be fighting. I didn't expect to survive this long, Jonah replied, but I kept picturing him. Scout. Every time I wanted to give up, I'd see those blue eyes and remember, I still had something good in this world. You still do, Morris said gently, even now. A knock on the door interrupted them. A guard leaned in and spoke softly to another officer. Jonah's heart stopped. The guard stepped inside. Mr. Reed, he said, she's here. Jonah stood so fast the chair behind him screeched backward. She brought him? They're clearing her at the gate now, the guard said. We're prepping the visitation room. Jonah didn't respond right away. He pressed both hands to his face. His knees threatened to give. A tremor shook through him, not from fear, but from a kind of joy so overwhelming it couldn't fit inside a man like him anymore. Thank you, he whispered, breathless. The chaplain nodded, silently rising to his feet. I'll wait outside. As the room emptied, Jonah sat down again, burying his head in his hands. He didn't know how Scout would react. What if the dog had forgotten him? What if he didn't come near? But a quiet voice inside him, small but stubborn, whispered, he'll remember. He never forgot. Naomi's truck pulled into the outer gate of Stonegate at 5:47 a.m. Scout stood, nose pressed against the window. A tall, uniformed officer approached her driver's side and tapped the glass. Naomi rolled it down. Miss Carson? Yes, she said, her voice tight. Follow me. Park along the east wing and bring the dog on leash. Naomi nodded and parked in a space that felt colder than the rest of the world. She clipped Scout's leash and opened the door. The shepherd leapt out with the energy of a younger dog, sniffing the air, ears swiveling. Inside the facility, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Concrete halls loomed like tunnels toward inevitability. Naomi followed the officer down a long corridor until they reached a door. Wait here, he said. Naomi knelt beside Scout, stroking the top of his head. He's just beyond that door, she whispered. You go to him. Okay? Let him know you never forgot. The door creaked open. A guard appeared and looked at her, then at the dog. Ready? Naomi stood. Yes, please. Let them have their moment. The guard stepped aside, and Scout took off like a bolt of lightning, leash dragging behind him, paws thundering down the hallway toward the heart of a prison that had never seen anything like the moment about to unfold. And just beyond that hallway, behind one last heavy door, stood a man whose hope had flickered like a dying flame until a dog ran back into his life to light it once more. The door creaked open. Jonah didn't dare move. His breath caught mid-exhale, as if the mere act of breathing too loudly might shatter whatever moment the universe was granting him. Then came the sound, the rapid scrape of claws on tile, fast, familiar. His heart slammed against his ribcage. And then, like a dream that arrived on 4 legs and refused to stay imaginary, Scout burst through the doorway. Scout? Jonah whispered, voice strangled with disbelief. The German shepherd skidded into the room, nails clicking, tongue lolling, and froze for just a second. Those ice-blue eyes locked onto Jonah's face. Recognition. It was instantaneous, With a yelp so high-pitched it echoed off the sterile walls, Scout lunged forward, springing up toward Jonah's chest in one fluid motion. Jonah dropped to his knees as 75 pounds of fur and loyalty collided with him, knocking the air from his lungs. "Buddy?" Jonah choked, his arms wrapping around the dog's thick frame. "Oh my God, buddy, you remember me?" Scout whined and barked and whimpered all at once, licking Jonah's face with frantic energy, tail wagging like a metronome out of time. Jonah buried his face in the thick fur of Scout's neck and sobbed. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that had been caged inside for 5 long years. He didn't care who watched. He didn't care that he was still in chains. He didn't care that the death chamber was waiting just down the corridor. In that moment, all he knew was the warmth of his dog, the only soul who'd loved him without condition, without question, without hesitation. Scout pawed at his chest, trying to climb further into his arms. Jonah laughed, then cried harder. "I missed you so damn much," he murmured. "You're bigger, and you stink, and I love you more than life." A voice cleared in the background. Warden Caro, standing near the doorway. She'd stepped in, quietly, at some point during the chaos, her arms folded, her eyes carefully unreadable. But the way her jaw clenched suggested she was biting back something. Emotion, maybe, or guilt. "We'll give you 15 minutes, she said softly. "Then the chaplain will return." Jonah didn't even look up. "Thank you," he whispered, voice muffled in Scout's fur. Naomi appeared a heartbeat later, her frame filling the doorway. Her eyes were glassy, her lips trembling. She didn't speak. She just stood and watched, the man she'd once intended to marry and the dog they'd raised together, reunited on the cold tile floor of a prison cell. Scout noticed her a moment later and barked joyfully. He bounded to her, tail slapping the wall, licking her outstretched hands. Jonah looked up. "Naomi?" Their eyes met, and suddenly 5 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. "I didn't stop," she said, voice raw. "I kept trying. They wouldn't listen, Jonah. No one would." "I know," he said. "I know." She knelt beside him, and Scout sat between them, tail thumping, panting like he was in the middle of a summer field and not a death row cell. "I never gave him away," she said. "People told me to, said it'd be easier, said I should let go." "I would have understood if you had," Jonah said, "but I didn't." Jonah reached for her hand. They sat like that for a while, a fractured family whole again, if only for minutes. The moment was a sanctuary, a bubble of warmth inside the concrete tomb that had swallowed 5 years of Jonah's life. Nothing else mattered. Not the verdict, not the protests, not the lethal injection prepped and waiting. Only this. Only now. Only them. Scout pawed at Jonah's knee, then leaned his weight against him with the full trust of a creature who had waited longer than anyone for this reunion. Jonah exhaled slowly. "This is the only thing I wanted," he said. "If I go out today, I'll go out having had this." Naomi opened her mouth to speak, but the door opened again before she could. Chaplain Morris returned, his eyes gentle but urgent. Behind him, Warden Caro gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Time was running out. Naomi stood, wiping her eyes. "I'll wait outside," she said, voice shaking. "I'll be here." Jonah reached out and gently held her wrist for just a moment longer. "Thank you," he said, "for never giving up, for taking care of him." "You don't thank people for love," she whispered. "You just keep showing up." She bent to kiss Scout on the head, then turned and walked out. Scout whimpered, but remained by Jonah's side. Caro hesitated. "Mr. Reed," she said slowly. We've received word of a development. There may be." A static crackle on her radio interrupted her. She stepped into the hallway, muttering into the receiver. Jonah looked at Morris. That didn't sound like routine. The chaplain gave a faint smile. Hope rarely sounds routine. They sat in silence. Scout placed his head in Jonah's lap, the way he had on quiet nights long ago. Jonah stroked his ears. "It's not fair, buddy," he whispered. "It's not fair, and I still don't know how it all went so wrong." Scout let out a quiet huff and licked his palm. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the fog, casting a warm beam across the corridor outside the visitation room. Inside, a condemned man sat beside the only soul who had waited for him without fail. And somewhere beyond the walls of Stonegate, something had begun to shift, like the first creak of rusted hinges on a door long sealed. Truth, long buried, had stirred, and it was coming. The archivist frowned as Detective Marcus DeLoqua slid a faded manila folder across the cold steel desk. "This isn't protocol," the clerk muttered. Accessing sealed case files without approval? Delocqua leaned in, eyes steeled. It's also not protocol to send an innocent man to die. The small, fluorescent-lit room in the basement of the Redwood County Courthouse hadn't seen this much tension since the air conditioning went out during the Mearns embezzlement trial. But today, the pressure had nothing to do with climate control. Delocqua's jaw ticked as he opened the case box labeled State v. Reed, 5/17/19. He rifled through a decade of dust and red tape, past mugshots, autopsy diagrams, and grainy surveillance stills. But it was the forensic report, labeled Supplemental Analysis Number 2, that made his fingers still. This never made it to trial, he said under his breath. The clerk, eyes darting with unease, edged toward the door. Delocqua barely noticed. His hands trembled as he flipped through the suppressed evidence. A partial footprint outside the fire escape that did not match Jonah's shoe size. Gunpowder residue, but no gun was ever recovered. Surveillance footage logs showing timestamps edited from the night of Mearns' death. It was as if someone had carefully curated the narrative, and none of this had been disclosed. Delocqua's pulse roared in his ears. He'd led this investigation 5 years ago. He'd stood on the witness stand. He'd said the evidence was solid. He'd been wrong. Or worse, he'd been used. His phone vibrated against the metal table. Unknown number. He answered. "Is this Delocqua?" a low voice asked. "Yes." "Who's this?" "Name's Bryce Koenig. I used to handle tech contracts for Mearns' business properties. I saw your press inquiry. I've got records, phone pings, burner transactions, all buried in shell accounts." Delocqua stiffened. "You have access to those?" "I do now. Let's just say Mearns stiffed the wrong IT guy, and the man you should be looking at isn't Jonah Reed. It's someone named Walton Green." Delocqua's stomach dropped. Green, the fixer. A name he'd once dismissed as a conspiracy theory whispered by street lawyers and burned-out cops. Now he was rising from the shadows like a ghost with blood on his hands. "You can send me those records?" "I already did. Check your secure inbox. You'll want to read fast." The call ended. Delocqua opened his encrypted server. Files loaded, scans of offshore transfers, GPS metadata, call logs. There it was. Midnight on the night of the murder. A ping from Green's burner phone within a half-mile of Mearns' penthouse. And then, a final call to a contact labeled WG Drop, time-stamped 12:06 a.m., moments before the coroner would later estimate Mearns died. Delocqua stood up so fast the chair screeched backward. He had what he needed. Back inside Stonegate, Jonah sat cross-legged on the bunk, Scout curled against him. Time had melted into something shapeless. He couldn't tell if he'd been holding the dog for 10 minutes or 10 hours. The door buzzed. He expected the chaplain. Instead, Warden Caro returned, this time with a man Jonah hadn't seen in half a decade. "Reed," Caro said evenly. "You remember Detective Delocqua?" Jonah stood slowly. "Yeah, hard to forget the guy who helped put me here." Delocqua didn't flinch. "And I'm here to undo that." Jonah blinked. The silence was heavier than the air in solitary. "We've uncovered evidence that was never presented," Delocqua continued. "Financial records, forensics, surveillance data that was omitted or buried. Someone else was in Mearns' building the night he died. A man named Walton Green." Jonah stared. "I told you. I told all of you." "I know," Delocqua said quietly. "I know now." Caro cleared her throat. "We're forwarding everything to the governor's council. The DA's office is being briefed. But there's more." She turned toward Jonah. "The governor just issued a temporary stay of execution. 48 hours. Your case is under immediate review." Jonah couldn't speak. His knees buckled slightly. Scout whined and nudged him upright with his snout. "I'm not dying today?" he asked, voice cracking. "No," Caro said. "Not today." Jonah's head dropped, shoulders shaking. Scout barked softly once. The room felt small, but somehow impossibly it also felt like the universe had widened. He was still shackled, still watched. Still uncertain, but for the first time in 5 years, he was not doomed. He dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around Scout again, pressing his forehead into the thick fur and weeping like a man newly born. In the courthouse across town, Naomi burst through the glass doors, Delocqua's email still open on her phone. Behind her, the sun pierced through the clouds that had haunted the city for days. She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't over. But as she climbed the marble steps, heart pounding in time with the beat of a dog's tail on a prison floor, she finally let herself believe. They might win this. The district attorney's office loomed like a fortress of red tape and reinforced reputations. Naomi Carson stood at its granite steps, her hands trembling, not from cold but from fury wrapped in restraint. She wasn't just carrying a dog leash now. She carried the weight of 5 stolen years, of every ignored letter, every unanswered call, every dismissed plea. She marched through the revolving doors and headed straight for the front desk, her voice sharper than the heels clicking behind her. "I need to speak to Assistant District Attorney Morgan Whitlock. Now." The receptionist barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but if I don't get one in the next 60 seconds, I'll be standing outside with every reporter in this city and a thumb drive of evidence that your office buried a second forensic report in the Jonah Reed case." That got a response. Within minutes, she was in a glass-paneled conference room, staring down a man who once stood proud at the podium during Jonah's conviction, calling it a triumph of swift and righteous justice. Morgan Whitlock looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie hung loose around his collar, and his forehead bore a faint sheen of dread. "I don't know what you think you have." Naomi slapped a printed file onto the table. "Surveillance tampering, suppressed evidence. The name Walton Green mean anything to you?" Whitlock glanced at the papers, then at Naomi. "Where did you get this?" "Detective Delacroix. You remember him, your golden boy? He's now sitting with Jonah at Stonegate, trying to keep him alive long enough to testify to the truth." Whitlock opened the folder. His jaw tightened. If this is real?" "It is," Naomi cut in. "We don't have time for silence. We need a full stay. Not 48 hours. Jonah Reed needs to walk out of that prison, and your office needs to admit it got played." He stood, backing toward the door. "I need to make a few calls." "No," she said, rising with him. "You need to make one call. The governor." Back at Stonegate, Jonah paced his new holding room. Larger than his death row cell, but still windowless. The fluorescent lights buzzed above like a wasp nest in the ceiling. Scout, now allowed inside under special provision, lay at the foot of the bed, eyes tracking his every step. Jonah couldn't settle. He felt like the world was shifting beneath his feet, not fast enough to call it rescue, not slow enough to call it torture. He'd spent years praying for a break, and now that it was here, he didn't know how to breathe through it. The door opened again. It was Warden Caro. Her eyes had changed. Less armored, more haunted. "You should sit down," she said. Jonah obeyed. She handed him a folded piece of paper. "This just came through the governor's legal office. It's a request for an emergency hearing. Judge Lancaster has agreed to review the evidence within the next 24 hours. Jonah unfolded the page slowly, as if it might turn to ash in his hands. "I'm not free yet," he murmured. "No," Caro said, "but you're heard, finally." Scout let out a soft sigh from the floor, tail thumping twice against the wall. Jonah looked down at him and smiled. "We're not ghosts anymore, buddy." Detective Marcus Delacroix stood outside the courthouse in a charcoal overcoat, watching the afternoon sun flash off the windshield of a speeding black SUV. He was no longer sure who was chasing whom. His phone buzzed. It was Naomi. "They're backing down," she said. "Whitlock just filed an internal memo recommending a full review. He's not admitting guilt, but he knows the press storm is coming." Delacroix exhaled. "That means they're getting ready to flip, but we need more. I have a digital trail that puts Walton Green at the scene, but we still don't have a definitive link." Naomi's voice dropped. "What if I told you I might know where to find it?" Delacroix stilled. "Go on." "There's a storage unit. Jonah and I shared it before his arrest. I kept it all these years. It had everything from the security firm he was building, client records, vendor invoices. I haven't touched it since the trial." Delacroix was already turning back to his car. "Meet me there in an hour." An hour later, Naomi stood in front of a rusted metal door, key in hand, heart pounding. Delacroix's unmarked sedan idled nearby. She turned the lock. Inside, dust-blanketed shelves, crates, and file cabinets, old cameras, badges, floor plans. It looked like time itself had paused the day Jonah was taken. They moved in silence until Naomi found a folder marked Mearns Private Entry Logs. She opened it. Inside, a sign-in sheet for a private meeting Jonah had arranged with Douglas Mearns, scheduled the night before the murder. Jonah had logged it, but Mearns had canceled last minute. Scrawled in different handwriting, a note, rescheduled, Said he'll send WG instead. Naomi turned white. Delocqua's breath caught. WG, Walton Green. He took photos of the document, then looked at Naomi. This may be the direct link. He turned toward the storage exit. If this reaches the governor before sunrise, we can stop this. Naomi followed, wind pulling her hair into her eyes. Let's go save him, she said. Inside the warden's office at Stonegate, Kara watched the fax machine buzz and churn out pages of documents from the DA's office and Delocqua's forwarded emails. Her phone rang. She answered. Warden, this is Governor Riley's chief legal advisor. The governor has reviewed the documents you sent. Based on the new evidence, there is strong consideration for a stay pending full exoneration. Caro's lips parted. How soon will we know? There was a pause. Then, we're drafting the order now. You'll receive confirmation within the hour. Caro set the phone down. For a long moment, she stared out her window at the fading sun. Then she walked out of her office and toward Jonah's cell. Scout looked up first, ears pricked. Jonah stood, his chest rising and falling like a man preparing to take the biggest step of his life. Caro looked him in the eyes. We may have just stopped the clock. Judge Emily Lancaster adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the growing stack of affidavits, digital forensics reports, and the newly surfaced sign-in sheet connecting Walton Green to the victim, Douglas Mearns. It was 2:14 a.m. The courthouse was officially closed, but the chambers were lit, humming with an urgency that couldn't wait for dawn. Outside her office, whispers echoed in the marble hallway, reporters sniffing the scent of blood, interns exchanging nervous glances, and Detective Marcus Delacroix pacing like a man being chased by time itself. Inside, Judge Lancaster set down the final document and leaned back in her chair. Her eyes were tired, but her voice, when it came, was clear. Bring them in. The double doors opened. Delacroix entered first, then Naomi Carson, clutching the folder from the storage unit. Assistant DA Morgan Whitlock followed, looking like a man carrying a casket of his own making. Judge Lancaster didn't rise. Instead, she stared at Whitlock with a gaze that could boil glass. Tell me why this man was ever convicted. Whitlock shifted. At the time, the fingerprint evidence appeared irrefutable. Motive was outlined through a failed security contract. And the timeline. I've read the timeline, she snapped. I've also read the forensics report you never submitted, the digital pings from Walton Green, and the sign-in sheet that shows Mearns was planning to meet someone else the night of his death. That's not oversight, that's obstruction. Naomi's fists tightened around the folder. Delacroix stepped forward. Your Honor, the real killer, Walton Green, was hired to silence Mearns before he could expose a money laundering operation tied to corrupt developers. They used Jonah Reed as a shield because he was convenient, clean-cut, and connected to Mearns through a failed business pitch. The entire prosecution was engineered to look airtight. Judge Lancaster's eyes narrowed. Why now? Why 5 years later? Because I finally looked again, Delacroix said, and what I saw broke me. She studied him for a long moment, then picked up the faxed order from Governor Riley's office. The temporary stay was authorized, but Judge Lancaster had authority to issue a permanent one. She turned to Whitlock. If I vacate this conviction and recommend full exoneration pending further investigation, will your office resist? Whitlock exhaled. No, Your Honor. Her gavel came down like a thunderclap. Then prepare your office for scrutiny, because the trial of Jonah Reed may soon be known as the most catastrophic miscarriage of justice this city has ever seen. The sound of heavy boots approached Jonah's cell like a drum roll. He sat on the edge of his cot, Scout asleep at his feet. The dog stirred first, ears twitching, tail slowly thumping against the floor. Warden Caro appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 uniformed guards, but there was no solemnity, no grim silence. Instead, she gave a single nod. It's time. Jonah swallowed hard. Time for what? To leave, she said simply. He blinked. You mean? She opened the door. He stood slowly, heart hammering. You're not free yet, she cautioned, but you're no longer on death row. The conviction is being vacated. You're being transferred to pre-release custody, pending a full review and possible formal exoneration. Jonah stared at her. The words didn't land. Not fully. They floated, as if his mind had wrapped them in disbelief to protect his heart. Then Scout let out a joyful bark. And Jonah, after a beat, laughed. deep and real and shaking with emotion he hadn't let himself feel in years. "I get to live?" he asked softly. "Yes," Caro said. "You do." The pre-dawn streets of Redwood City were unusually quiet when the prison van pulled into the back lot of the courthouse. Naomi stood waiting. The moment Jonah stepped out of the van, no longer in shackles, dressed in a plain sweatshirt and jeans, the world seemed to hold its breath. He looked thinner, older, a man rebuilt in the dark. But when their eyes met, the years fell away. Naomi rushed forward, and he caught her in his arms with a force that made the guards glance away. She buried her face in his shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. "We brought you home." Scout barked from the nearby truck, pushing his paws against the window. Jonah turned toward the sound, grinning for the first time in years. "You brought him too?" Naomi nodded, wiping tears. "He never gave up on you." "Neither did I." A few photographers across the street snapped photos. The headlines would scream, "Death row inmate freed in stunning turnaround." But Jonah didn't care about any of it. He cared about this moment, the feel of Naomi's hand in his, the echo of Scout's bark, the light rising in the east. He turned to the officer who escorted him and said something no one expected. "Thank you for treating me like a human." The man nodded silently. And Jonah Reed walked through the courthouse doors, not as a ghost, not as a number, but as a man who defied the grave and reclaimed his name. Inside, Judge Lancaster awaited him. And outside, a city prepared to confront the truth it had buried for far too long. The courtroom was packed wall to wall. Journalists in rumpled suits, activists with protest signs tucked beneath their coats, law students leaning forward on the benches like they were witnessing history. Because they were. Jonah Reed stood beside his public defender at the defense table, no longer shackled, no longer muted by courtroom protocols. Across from him sat Assistant DA Morgan Whitlock, head down, flipping through papers as though he could hide behind them. Judge Emily Lancaster surveyed the room with a gaze forged in steel. "This hearing is not a trial," she said. "But the gravity of what's come to light demands the transparency of one. We are here to determine the legal path forward in light of suppressed evidence, a false narrative, and a conviction that appears catastrophically flawed." She turned toward the defense. "Mr. Reed, I'm told you wish to speak?" Jonah stood, his palms flat on the desk. For a long moment, he said nothing. He scanned the room slowly, first row to last, then found Naomi's face. She nodded once. Beside her, Scout sat with his head on her lap, wearing a newly minted service vest and a look of quiet pride. Jonah cleared his throat. "I don't know how to give a speech," he began. "All I know how to do is tell the truth, which is something this room hasn't heard from the people in charge in a very, very long time." He paused. "I didn't kill Douglas Mearns. I didn't even see him that night. I had a meeting scheduled with him the day before. He canceled, said he'd send someone else." He turned to look directly at Whitlock. "That man's name was Walton Green." The murmurs in the courtroom began to rise, but Judge Lancaster silenced them with a single raised hand. Jonah continued. "I sat on death row for 5 years, while men in suits told reporters they were proud of the justice system, while prosecutors ignored their own doubts, while evidence that could have saved me was filed away like garbage." He turned back toward the gallery, toward the cameras. "I lost my business, I lost friends, I lost 5 birthdays, 5 Christmases, 5 years of my life. But I didn't lose everything, because one person, one woman, refused to stop fighting for me. Because a dog remembered who I was when the world tried to forget. And because one man, Detective Delacroix, finally grew the courage to admit he was wrong." Delacroix, seated near the back, looked down. Jonah looked directly into a reporter's lens now. "You want to write a headline? Try this." They knew, and they let it happen anyway. A hush swept the room. He took one last breath. "My name is Jonah Reed. I'm not a statistic. I'm not a case file. I'm a man, and I deserve to live without a target on my back, without being called an ex-con, without having to convince anyone else that I'm innocent. That work's already been done. Now it's your turn." He turned back to Judge Lancaster. "I want the charges vacated, not delayed, not reviewed. I want my name back." Lancaster nodded slowly. "Mr. Reed, this court has seen enough." She raised her gavel. "Motion to vacate the conviction in full. All charges dropped. The state's record will reflect this man's innocence, not his accusation." The gavel slammed, and Jonah Reed was Finally, officially free. Outside, the world had changed. Protesters clashed with reporters. Crowds surged around Naomi as she tried to usher Jonah and Scout through the courthouse doors. "Jonah, Jonah!" shouted one journalist. "What are your next steps?" "Will you sue the city?" asked another. "Will you speak before Congress?" Jonah shielded his eyes from the cameras. "I'm not here for a headline," he said. "I'm here to make sure no one else goes through what I did." He looked down at Scout, "And maybe go for a walk." The crowd erupted in laughter, applause, and tears. Delocqua found Naomi at the edge of the sidewalk. "It's not over," he said. "The investigation's expanding. 3 of Mearns's partners are now under grand jury review. The whole system's shaking." Naomi nodded. "Good. Let it." She looked at Jonah, who had just knelt to hug Scout in front of the flashing bulbs. "They tried to bury him," she said, "but he was a seed." That night, in the quiet of Naomi's home, Jonah stood at the back door watching Scout sniff the air of their small backyard. A lamp glowed behind him. Naomi moved in the kitchen, barefoot, humming a song from years ago. He heard her voice float in. "You okay?" "I think so," he said. "I made tea," she said, "and I found some of your old flannel shirts." Jonah turned to her. "I don't know how to be free yet." Naomi smiled softly. "That's okay. We'll figure it out, one day at a time." He stepped inside and wrapped his arms around her. Scout barked at the door. "We should let him in," she said. "He's earned it." They opened the door, and the German shepherd bounded in like a storm, of joy, of memory, of grace. Jonah laughed and knelt, rubbing behind Scout's ears. "We're home, boy," he said. "And this time, no one's taking that from us." 3 days after Jonah Reed walked out of the courthouse a free man, the storm he left behind was still gathering strength. News vans circled Redwood City's municipal buildings like vultures. Local channels broke from routine coverage to show grainy courtroom footage of Jonah's emotional testimony. Hashtags trended. Justice for Jonah, wrong man, they knew. But beneath the celebration, a deeper rot was beginning to tremble. And the men who had buried the truth? They weren't done yet. Inside a penthouse suite high above the city, a man named Russell Landry watched the news in silence. Landry was one of the last remaining pillars of the Mearns development empire. A tall man with frost-white hair and hands too smooth for a hammer, he sat in a leather chair with a crystal tumbler balanced on one knee. Behind him, a younger man, Dale Wexler, paced anxiously. "They're sniffing too close," Wexler said. "That detective Delocqua, he's talking to the feds. They're digging through shell companies, tax records. That Walton Green business was supposed to be a dead end." Landry's gaze didn't move from the screen. Jonah Reed's face filled it. Calm, unflinching, with Scout at his side. "Dead ends resurrect when you don't bury them deep enough," Landry muttered. Wexler pulled at his collar. "What do we do if this turns into indictments?" Landry finally turned his head. "Contain it." Wexler blinked. I mean make sure the narrative stays where it belongs." Jonah Reed had his moment. But moments fade. What matters is who controls what comes next. Meanwhile, Jonah was pacing through Naomi's modest kitchen, a cup of untouched tea cooling in his hand. "I can't sleep," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear the lock turning. The cell door, the needle tray." Naomi set down her phone and walked over. "That's trauma, Jonah. You survived something most people can't even imagine. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." He sat, rubbing his face. "I don't even know who I am outside that cell." She pulled out a folder from the drawer and laid it in front of him. "What's this?" "A letter," she said, "from the Innocence Foundation. They want to meet with you. They think your story could help bring light to dozens of other cases. They also want you to consider working with a task force." Jonah's brow furrowed. "What task force?" "Governor Riley's office. They're forming an independent review board for past convictions. They want someone who's lived through it." Jonah stared at the folder. "I don't want to be anyone's symbol." "I know," she said gently. "But maybe this is more than that. Maybe this is your chance to make sure no one else ends up where you did." He didn't speak right away. Scout laid his head on Jonah's foot, eyes closed but alert. Jonah leaned back. "What if I'm not ready?" "Then we'll wait," Naomi said. "But if you are, just know I'm with you." He nodded. The old Jonah, the one who built a business from scratch, who dreamed of owning property, of teaching Scout new tricks every Sunday morning, he had been erased. But something new was forming, something carved from the fire. That evening, Detective Delocqua met Naomi in a diner just outside city limits. She slid a flash drive across the table. "This is from the storage unit," she said. "We missed it the first time. It's a security contract form signed by Mearns. It has a clause, third-party access may require non-disclosure approval. Guess who that's signed by?" Delocqua opened the file. His eyes widened. "Landry." "Exactly," Naomi said. "He's been hiding in plain sight." Delocqua nodded. "This could link the entire conspiracy." "And Walton Green?" she asked. "Flipped," he said, "testifying in exchange for protection. Says Landry paid him through a dummy corporation and ordered the entire cover-up." Naomi leaned forward. "Then what are we waiting for?" Delocqua's smile was grim. "The DA's office wants more. They want hard proof of motive. They're terrified of indicting city royalty on conspiracy charges without a perfect case." Naomi stared at him. "You mean they're scared?" "Yes," Delocqua admitted. "But I'm not." Later that night, Jonah walked alone along the Redwood Creek Trail. The moonlight shimmered off the water. Scout padded beside him, tail flicking gently, ears swiveling at every sound. Jonah paused at the old wooden bridge where he and Naomi used to sit after work. He stared into the current. He didn't speak aloud, but in his mind he said it. "You took 5 years from me, but I'm still here. And I'm not afraid of you." Scout nudged his leg. Jonah turned to head home. But as he did, his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Reed," came a voice, calm and clipped. "This is Eric Landry. I represent certain parties who believe your recent court victory may be causing unnecessary instability in the city." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell gave you my number?" "I think you should understand something," Landry continued. "Justice is not about right and wrong. It's about perception, and you've had yours. Now, we suggest you enjoy your freedom, quietly." Jonah's voice went low and steady. "Is that a threat?" "No, Mr. Reed. It's a reminder. You survived once. Don't mistake that for immunity." Click. Jonah stood frozen on the trail, breath frosting in the air. Scout growled, low, guttural, the way he had when danger was near. Jonah looked down at him. "We're not done yet, boy. Not even close." And as they walked back under the fractured moonlight, Jonah Reed knew. This wasn't just a story of exoneration anymore. It was a reckoning. The next morning, the front page of the Redwood Sentinel carried a headline in bold red. "Cleared, but not safe. Jonah Reed receives threat after court victory." Below it, a grainy photo of Jonah and Scout on the courthouse steps, surrounded by flashing cameras and fading cheers. Jonah read the headline in Naomi's kitchen, the steam from his untouched coffee curling toward the ceiling like smoke from an old wound. "Did you tell them?" he asked, voice low. Naomi stood by the sink, folding a dish towel. "No," she said, "but someone clearly leaked it. Maybe one of the interns at the DA's office, maybe Delocqua." He didn't respond. Scout let out a quiet huff from under the table, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Naomi stepped closer. "You okay?" "I'm tired," Jonah said. "But not of fighting, just of knowing that justice has to be dragged out screaming, while lies come dressed in silk ties and polished shoes." Naomi sat beside him, gently placing her hand over his. "You're not alone in this." He turned his palm up, interlocking his fingers with hers. "I don't want you or Scout caught in the crossfire." "We already are," she whispered. "But we're not backing down." Jonah stared out the window. Somewhere beyond the modest yard and picket fence, Russell Landry was making calls, pulling strings, tightening the noose, not with rope, but with reputation, pressure, and politics. The kind of war that didn't use guns, the kind that killed slowly. At the state capitol, the governor's newly formed Independent Conviction Integrity Unit met for the first time. It was a small, glass-walled room filled with unease and ambition. Jonah sat at the far end of the conference table, wearing a plain gray sweater and jeans. He looked out of place next to the state officials in tailored suits and polished shoes, but he didn't shrink from their eyes. Across from him sat Lieutenant Governor Marie Albright, flanked by 2 aides and a notepad already half filled with names. "We want to thank you for being here, Mr. Reed," she began, clasping her hands, "and more importantly, for agreeing to help us launch this review board. Your story has opened eyes, but now we need to open files." Jonah's fingers tapped softly on the table. "How deep are you willing to go?" "As deep as the truth takes us," she said. He tilted his head. "Even if the truth drags half the city's legacy through the mud." A pause. Then, Especially then. Jonah nodded. Good, he said, because I'm not here to be a poster boy, I'm here to be a scalpel. Back in Redwood City, Delocqua sat at his desk surrounded by mountains of new documentation. Every lead he followed pointed back to Landry and his network, offshore accounts, fake consulting firms, private security payments. But none of it, so far, was enough. He needed the keystone, the piece that made the structure collapse. Then his phone rang. He answered, half expecting another anonymous warning. But the voice on the line was familiar, shaky. Detective, it's Bryce Koenig. I need to talk. In person. Bryce was the IT contractor who had unearthed the phone data pointing to Walton Green. He'd been silent since the article broke. I'm being watched, Bryce whispered. I don't know who, but they know I helped you. Delocqua straightened. Where are you? Storage Unit 3B off Grand Avenue. Come alone, bring backup if you want, but keep it off the books. The call ended. That night, Jonah received another call from someone he hadn't heard from in over 5 years. It was Marcellus Ford, a former business partner from his old security firm, a man who had vanished after Jonah's arrest. You still alive? Marcellus asked, his voice half joking, half wary. Barely, Jonah replied. I saw the news, Marcellus continued, and I saw what they tried to do. I should have said something sooner. Jonah's jaw tightened. Then say it now. I know about the meeting Mearns had scheduled with you. I was supposed to be there too, but I bailed. Got scared off when a guy named Green showed up early, said Mearns changed the plan. He was wearing a badge, but it wasn't real. I knew something was off, but I didn't stick around. Jonah went cold. Can you prove it? I've still got the original contract on email, and a voicemail Mearns left me, paranoid, saying he was being followed. Forward everything to Delocqua, Jonah said. Jonah, I'm sorry. You will be, Jonah replied, when you see what they almost did to me. He hung up and stood in silence. Scout watched him from the doorway, tail still, eyes alert. Naomi appeared behind him, holding her phone. Delocqua just texted. He's meeting someone tonight who says they've got a smoking gun. Jonah nodded. It's time. An hour later, in the shadows of a vacant storage lot, Detective Marcus Delocqua entered Unit 3B. Bryce was already inside, pale, jittery, and drenched in sweat. I've got files, he said. Hard copies. They show shell company payments routed from Landry's firm straight into Green's offshore accounts. Not just one hit, multiple. Delocqua opened the folder. Wire transfers, internal memos, even a scanned signature from Landry authorizing external conflict resolution. This was it. The keystone. Then, outside, the screech of tires. Delocqua's instincts flared. Run, he barked. Grabbing Bryce by the arm, shots rang out. Shadows moved at the storage lot's edge. Dark figures, quick, disciplined, professional. Not amateurs, not local muscle. Hit men. They were trying to clean up loose ends. Delocqua shoved Bryce into the passenger seat of his unmarked sedan and peeled out of the lot as bullets ricocheted off the rear bumper. Bryce screamed. I thought this was over. It's just beginning, Delocqua growled, flooring the accelerator. Back at Naomi's house, Jonah paced. He knew something was wrong before the phone rang. He answered. Delocqua's voice came through, breathless. We've got them. We've got everything, but they just tried to kill us. Jonah froze. Are you okay? For now. But listen to me, this is bigger than one conviction. This goes all the way to the governor's donors. You step out publicly again, you'll have a target on your back. Jonah looked at Naomi, who stood silently nearby. Then he looked at Scout. Then he looked in the mirror. I don't care, he said. If I stay silent, they win. And I didn't survive 5 years in a cage just to be scared now. The auditorium inside Redwood City Civic Hall hadn't seen this many cameras since election night. But today, it wasn't a politician behind the podium. It was a man they'd once paraded in cuffs. Jonah Reed stood before the mic in a plain navy blazer. No teleprompter, no security detail. Just him, Naomi in the front row, and Scout lying at her feet, head resting on his paws, eyes trained on his human. All around them, the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Victims of wrongful convictions, journalists from both coasts, families who had lost sons, husbands, fathers to the same system that tried to erase Jonah. And behind it all, a question lingered like a thundercloud. Would he name names? Would he speak the truth so clearly that the whole city would have to listen? Jonah gripped the podium. They said I was a killer. He paused. The silence thickened. They said I was a liar, a manipulator, a a man who let rage control him. For 5 years, I lived with that story written across my back, branded by it, until they brought me to the brink of death. He took a breath. But they got something wrong. You see, they thought burying me would end me, but they forgot something. He looked into the crowd. I was the seed. Murmurs rippled across the room. Cameras zoomed in. Scout lifted his head. I grew in the dark, Jonah continued. I learned what silence costs, what comfort does to a conscience. I learned how power rewrites the truth. But I also learned that when one person, just one, refuses to let the lie stand, the whole system shakes. He gestured toward Naomi. She never stopped fighting, even when the world told her I was lost. Then toward Delocqua, standing near the exit. He finally faced what he'd done. He took the risk, pulled the thread, and found out the truth was tangled in every part of this city's soul. He turned his gaze to the cameras. And now, I'm here to pull it all the way through. He unfolded a sheet of paper from his pocket. A list of names. Douglas Mearns was killed not by chance, but by design, because he threatened to expose corrupt deals tied to a real estate empire, propped up by men like Russell Landry. He read the names slowly, deliberately. Landry paid a fixer named Walton Green. That fixer used my identity, framed me, and disappeared with protection from the same companies that funded campaigns for city officials and lined the pockets of prosecutors. Cameras clicked like rain. This isn't just about me, it's about every person still rotting in a cell because the truth wasn't profitable. He held up a second sheet. This is a petition for the creation of a permanent conviction review board. Independent, transparent, with subpoena power. I won't stop until every name buried in the darkness is brought into the light. He looked around. I'm not here to be a symbol. I'm here to make sure no one else becomes a statistic. He stepped back from the mic, and the room erupted. Applause, shouts, tears. Naomi stood, clapping through streaming eyes. Scout barked once, a deep, proud sound that echoed off the walls. Jonah looked out over the sea of people and felt something crack inside him. Not pain, not fear. Release. For the first time, his voice had been heard not as a plea, but as a reckoning. That night, as arrest warrants were issued for Russell Landry, Dale Wexler, and 2 senior officials in the Mearns development firm, Jonah and Naomi sat on the back porch with Scout between them. Naomi held the letter from the governor's office in her lap. You're being offered a full state settlement, she said softly. $7 million. Jonah stared at the stars. I'll take it. She turned to him. You will? He nodded. But I'm not keeping it. I want to start something, a foundation. Not just for exonerees, for families, for reintegration, legal aid, mental health, jobs, a real path forward. Naomi smiled. What will you call it? Jonah looked at Scout, then at her. Eclipse, he said. The darkest hour doesn't last forever. 6 months later, the Eclipse Foundation opened its first community center in Redwood City. Formerly incarcerated men and women now had a place to go where they were more than case numbers. They were survivors, builders, leaders. And on the wall behind the front desk, etched into steel, they tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. Jonah Reed. In the final scene, Jonah stands at Redwood Creek again. The wind is soft, the sun is setting, Naomi's hand finds his, and Scout, tail wagging, dashes through tall grass like a pup reborn. Jonah breathes in the moment, whole, free, home. They put an innocent man in a cage and told the world he was a monster. But Jonah Reed didn't just survive death row, he exposed the men who tried to bury him and built something stronger than revenge. Justice. To anyone watching, if you've ever been silenced, forgotten, or cast aside, this story is your reminder that truth always finds a way back to the light. And to the ones who tried to destroy him, he forgave them nothing. He gave the world everything, because he was never the criminal. He was the storm they never saw coming.